about Maryland's African-American history. Last Saturday, I conducted a tour of the last building built by black Civil War veterans left in the United States. The Charles Sumner Post, number 25 of the Grand Army of the Republic building in Chestertown, Kent County, Maryland. The Grand Army of the Republic was a fraternal organization made up of Union Civil War veterans. The Grand Army of the Republic was the first integrated group of its type in this country. That alone makes it unique. The Charles Sumner Post, number 25 of the Grand Army of the Republic, represents part of our story that you will never see in history books. Maryland has a unique place in this nation's history that makes the story of these men who were members of that post different from black veterans from Virginia, where my family lived, or those from Pennsylvania, where I was raised, or those from all the other states, slave or free. When the Civil War started, 4 slave states remained loyal and did not leave the Union. They were called the border states. Maryland was one of those border states. When the Emancipation Proclamation was issued, the slaves in Maryland were not included because Maryland did not rebel. The Emancipation Proclamation allowed blacks to officially be recruited into the Army. I said officially because the first South Carolina volunteers, colored, had already been formed and fighting before that time. When this story is usually told, it usually follows the stories of black men lining up to enlist to fight, but that was not always the case. Remember, the slaves in Maryland at this point had no guarantee that they or their families would be freed after the war if they entered the Army. Yet we're told that 450 men from Kent County entered the Army, and many of them entered as slaves. Why? First, the owners were given a $300 bounty for each slave of their slaves that entered the Army. It is very possible that some of these men were actually substitutes for their owners. Others had no choice in the matter. They were simply picked up wherever they were, in the field or on the street, and taken into the Army. Then there are those that simply enlisted. They became part of the black Army units called United States Colored Troops. From these humble beginnings came the black Civil War veterans of the Charles Sumner Post. These men of King County in general would go on to be some of the most honored fighting men in history. They were fighting for a purpose, the emancipation of their families. They fought with pride, and they fought for the promise of a better life if they were emancipated. When the war broke out, Maryland had the largest population of emancipated or free blacks in the country. Baltimore had more emancipated or free blacks than any other city in the nation. There were 7 regiments of black soldiers raised in Maryland. The most gallant fighting by black soldiers was at the Battle of Chapin's Farm in Virginia. There were 16 black men that won Congressional Medal honors during the Civil War. 13 of those men won their medals at Chapin's Farm. 8 of the 13 men that won those medals in that battle were from Maryland. There were more Congressional Medal of Honor winners from black units from Maryland than from all the other states combined. The man who would become the most famous of all the black Civil War soldiers, Christian Fleetwood, is from Maryland. Some members of the Charles Sumner Post were present when General Robert E. Lee surrendered at Appomattox. The question then became, what do you do with these armed black men now that the war is over? The black units were so aggressive that these men were immediately sent to Texas to guard the border, like the National Guard is doing today. This was 142 years ago. But there's more. From the United States colored troops stationed in the West were formed the Buffalo Soldiers. The proud men of Charles Sumner Post then returned to their homes and united to fight another battle for the promise of a better life for their families. But when I think of these men, it becomes personal. I remember that on April 5th, 1865, General Ulysses S. Grant and the 7th Regiment United States Colored Troops were in a town called Nottoway Courthouse, Virginia, where my great-great-great-grandmother, Daphne Jones, my great-great-grandmother, Louisa Jones, and my great-great-aunt, Helen Jones, and the rest of my family were liberated. With General Grant were these men: William Broadway, Isaac Cooper, George Dunson, Frederick Henson, and George Jones. All these men were future members of the Charles Sumner Post number 25. These men were also in Texas with General Gordon Granger on June 19, 1865, 142 years ago today, when the last of the former slaves were liberated. The anniversary we celebrate today as Juneteenth. These men did what the Emancipation Proclamation and the 13th Amendment did not do. These men of purpose and pride delivered the promise of emancipation to former slaves. They were at freedom's door as slaves and they threw it open. Wherever they had been, former slaves could say, free at last, thank God Almighty, I'm free at last.